Most of you asked for it, so let's do it. The S22 Ultra versus the brand new S24 Ultra. Today I want to answer the question, is it worth upgrading from this to this? Let's go. The S22 Ultra. Samsung changed a lot about their Ultra lineup when this came out. Samsung ended up merging the Note into the Ultra flagship lineup. A lot of people said that it was basically just a Note that got rebranded. They're partially correct because Samsung brought a lot of what the S series was, which was the camera and the display innovation, and merged it with the S Pen and the industrial design of the Note. I have already compared every Ultra Samsung has made in a separate video, so please go and check that out. But today we're going to focus more specifically on where the upgrades lie from the S22 Ultra to the S24 Ultra. We've got a lot of different categories to look at. I'm going to focus specifically on the ones that you voted on in the poll, but I still need to look at all of them with equal measure. So let's start with design and display. From a design standpoint, the S22 Ultra is still incredible. It feels so seamless in the hand. I think that's my favorite word to describe it, is it's seamless. It has this really nice feel going from back glass into the metal frame in the middle and into the glass at the front. Because of the way Samsung have shaped it, it's got this really nice ergonomic curve at the back, which seamlessly goes and flows into the curve in the middle and then into the curve on the front. It feels sensational to hold. Even now, 2 years on, I still think it's one of the most comfortable devices to hold in the hand. But ergonomics aside, it's not practical in day-to-day. What you get from upgrading to the S24 Ultra is not necessarily the most comfortable when it comes to in-hand feel compared to this, but you get a more practical in-hand feel. Samsung have still maintained the curves, not on the glass, but in the frame. The curved mid-frame, which is now a matte finish titanium, which does feel a little bit more cohesive with the back glass in particular. You get the more practical, less accidental touches, well none because it's a completely flat display, and you get more surface area for the S Pen to travel along. Samsung focused more on refining the actual practical use of a design of a phone versus just making it feel good in the hand. With all that aside though, just on pure feel, S22 Ultra still feels the best of any smartphone that I've held for a while. And I do miss the way Samsung used to design phones like this. Another point too about the design is that the materials have obviously been upgraded. That just comes with any generational leap. The materials are going to be stronger and are going to be more durable. That doesn't mean though that you'll have many problems with the S22 Ultra regarding durability. It just means that as technology advances, so does the hardware. And part of that hardware advancement is the display. There's not much more that really needs to be said about the display of the S24 Ultra. Samsung have packed an incredible panel in here. Not only has it got a new peak brightness of 2600 nits, but Samsung have refined the color science to be a little bit more accurate and not quite as punchy and vivid. They have, of course, put in that update in the February software version that gives you that more control over the vividness slider, and that has made a difference. But what has probably escalated this display above all else, above the brightness in general, is the anti-reflectivity coating. This thing is phenomenal, because when you take this outdoors, yes, you get the brightness, but you also aren't distracted by the trees or anything else that's really around you. And you can see that side by side directly, how much of an improvement that anti-reflectivity coating has made. That doesn't mean the display on this is bad. In fact, Samsung put an incredible panel for its time in the S22 Ultra, peaking at 1750 nits, and on top of that, incredibly bright colors and punchy colors. This was Samsung's first Vision Booster display as well. You got a really nice display that gave you good, vibrant colors for viewing content, taking outdoors, and doing a lot of things on. Samsung have just made it better with the S24 Ultra. There's absolutely no denying that. However, if you prefer vibrant, punchy colors, then you might actually think the S22 Ultra is better for you. So maybe hold on to it. But that display on the S24 Ultra, it's sensational. Let's shift into the camera, because this is something a lot of you wanted to see. From a hardware level, Samsung doesn't look like they've changed a lot, because the arrangement is still the same. You still have an ultra-wide camera, you still have a high-resolution main camera, you still have 2 telephoto lenses that give you exceptional sort of flexibility. But there is a lot more beneath the surface that is upgraded that you can't necessarily see on a spec sheet. The main camera in particular, whilst it has got that bump to 200 megapixel, something that doesn't get spoken about is Samsung have put quad pixel autofocus into the main camera. This makes a drastic difference when you're taking photos of moving subjects, when you're focusing on things quickly, and also when you're taking photos quickly. It improves that element as well. The 3x and the ultra wide camera are the same. There's still a 10 megapixel and a 12 megapixel camera respectively for the ultra wide at 12 and the 3x at 10. What Samsung changed is the 10x camera is now a 5x. Some of you might think that's a step backwards, but when we get to the examples of photos, you'll see that it's not. The other hardware change was the selfie camera. Samsung went from a 40 megapixel selfie camera down to a 12, but improved the quality of the sensor by putting in dual pixel autofocus and making it larger. So there's some added benefits changing hardware and dropping things down actually can bring when you compare hardware specifically. But a phone is more than just the hardware. Processing, especially with smartphones, is what changes the game. Samsung, with its generational leaps, put in new processors. And starting with the S23 Ultra, Samsung used a special Qualcomm Snapdragon variant, a Snapdragon for Galaxy. That definitely improved things. And the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy versus the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, which is the S22 Ultra I have, there is massive processing differences. So let's take a look. Something you'll see throughout the photos that get taken is the S24 Ultra favors some lighter processing, but with more detail in some of the finer areas of the photo. You'll see it as you sort of look through these photos that I'm putting up here. Feel free to pause on the photo and pinch to zoom in on YouTube to get a bit of a closer look. You'll see that the detail and the lighter processing kind of brings more out of the photo. It's not super light. It's not like the S23 Ultra was last year. They have kind of struck a bit of a balance between the two. But the detail in the outer areas of the photos, you'll absolutely see, like in things like grass and trees, some more finer details being brought out with the S24 Ultra. There's also better colors and contrast. Something that the S22 Ultra did, it punched up the colors quite significantly, and that hasn't really been pared back even with multiple software updates. The S24 Ultra straight out of the gate has kind of been this more natural processing, a bit of a warmer tone to photos as well versus what was in previous generations of Samsung phones. Something else that I noticed too is the control of highlights, so like direct sunlight and sort of poking through things in the sky, like if the sun's poking through a gap. The S24 Ultra handles it a lot better. Better contrast, brings out more of the sky around it, and I think that's probably a lot to do with the multiple frame stacking that it's doing and controlling and capturing better detail and better contrast with HDR. Something else you'll be able to see across these photos too is that the sky and the clouds have a bit of a different representation. And you'll see that when you compare things side by side, that the colors and the texture of the clouds are different. Whichever one's better, it's probably up to you to decide. Different doesn't always mean better. So you just have to decide which one of these sort of variants you like in terms of the clouds and the sky. I mentioned how the S24 Ultra has the quad pixel autofocus. That makes such a big difference in focusing on the whole picture. Quad pixel autofocus means there's 100% of the pixels are used for focusing versus 6 to 7% from the previous generation, which is the S22 Ultra in this instance. The difference this makes is in the foreground of a photo, it has everything in detail and focus much sharper. This is something I noticed across a multitude of photos that I took between these two phones. The foreground detail is so much sharper and has so much more texture about it versus what the S22 Ultra was capturing. And it's 100% down to that main camera having that quad pixel autofocus versus just the standard phase detection autofocus from the S22 Ultra. Hands down, that's the reason. I also wanted to test a claim Samsung made in the February update where flowers get more detail, and that is accurate. Samsung have brought out more detail in flowers on the S24 Ultra versus what they did on the S22 Ultra. I know that was specifically mentioning previous versions of S24 Ultra software, but you can see even the colors and the detail. The S24 Ultra is just capturing much more in the photo versus what the S22 Ultra did. It almost was like the S22 Ultra was just capturing punchy color and that was it, whereas detail and color were the priority with the S24 Ultra. Across the other cameras as well, Samsung seemed to have improved the processing. So like the 10 times zoom, for example, and even just zoom in general. The S22 Ultra almost had this like white haze over the top of the photo, whereas the S24 Ultra sort of brought the color back out a lot more and processed the actual image with color, not just taking the photo and that was it. I took some high resolution photos as well. What I noticed though with the high resolution was that whilst the lighting was better on the S24 Ultra, strangely the 200 megapixel versus 108 didn't have more detail. I'm not sure why that might be. It could be software related. It could just be the fact that the environment I was taking photos in maybe couldn't replicate the detail on the S24 Ultra. Whatever the reason, that high res version 200 versus 108, the S22 Ultra had more detail at 108. To be honest, both resolutions are enough detail, so yeah. Okay, moving into the range of zoom, because that is probably a sticking point. A lot of people will be hard pressed to try and give up that 10 times pure optical zoom for a optical like digital crop at 10 times. But you shouldn't be worried, because from a detail perspective, the difference is negligible. If anything, sometimes the S24 Ultra slightly has more, but for the majority of time, you'll process pretty similar detail at both cameras. The 30x, unsurprisingly, is kind of the same, but again, with that processing difference that you see. That 30x has been the subject of a lot of discussion on Twitter lately, /X, and it's not the end of the world if your 30x zoom doesn't look like 10x, but you still want it to look good, and I think it looks good enough. But obviously I'd like to see it do a bit better, especially on the S24 Ultra. But where these two cameras sort of separate is the 5x camera offers you so much more flexibility. Because between 5 and 10x, you're actually getting optical quality because of the 50 megapixel scaling down and sort of finding a 12 megapixel photo in between that range, versus that S22 Ultra not doing that. You can see at 7.5x, for example, the sharpness and detail is so much better on the S24 Ultra versus the S22 Ultra. And you'd expect that, because that is what this camera has been brought in to do. The S22 Ultra having to rely on that 3x, it means you can only really take a 3x or a 10x. You can't really have something in between because of that limitation. The 5x camera too on the S24 Ultra can be used kind of like a telemacro. So you can get in close to something from standing far away, and you can capture fine details and give it this really nice dramatic effect with sort of bokeh being created and the detail getting in nice and close without having to really be nice and close. You can't do that on the S22 Ultra. You're relying on the ultra-wide macro only. The S24 Ultra can do that too, so that, again, that increases that flexibility. Now, I mentioned with the quad pixel autofocus that it's going to be better at capturing moving things. And yeah, 100%. Not only can you do my least favorite thing in the world, which is to rapidly press the shutter button to snap a multitude of photos, the S24 Ultra comfortably accounts for the S22 Ultra in this scenario, especially as it not only captures more photos, but it also captures them better at the same time. You can see in the photos that sort of get brought out from this rapid fire shooting that the detail on faces and the clothes and like shoes even, for example, is a lot better on the S24 Ultra, even though it's had to capture more photos than the S22 Ultra. The S22 Ultra didn't have to capture a lot because it wasn't fast enough to do it, and it still didn't capture and process detail nearly as well as what the S24 Ultra can do. If you're looking to upgrade to take better photos of kids that run around a lot, the S24 Ultra comfortably accounts for what you're currently using if you're using an S22 Ultra right now. I tested portrait mode. The thing to note with portrait mode is you're going to get a good photo with the S22 Ultra anyway, just the flexibility is better. The S24 Ultra can do 1, 2, 3, and 5x, whereas the S22 Ultra can only do 1 and 3, which I found a bit strange. It's the only one of the Ultra lineup that doesn't have the 2x crop for portrait mode. Really strange. The actual photos themselves, the S22 Ultra, I found that the colors were a bit punchier, and it brought out a bit more red on the portrait mode, whereas the S24 Ultra had a bit more detail about it. But that's not really the point. The point is the flexibility. The different range of zooms that you can use to capture a portrait photo is so much better on the S24 Ultra. And with night mode, there's again another point of contention. The S22 Ultra actually fared quite well. The detail is quite good, and the photo in the foreground looks really nice for the night mode processing. What I did notice though is that the S24 Ultra kept more in focus and had more detail for things that were further away. A lot of that could be down to the better OIS, keeping the phone more stable when using handheld night mode, but also probably the processing of detail and the quad pixel autofocus as well, picking up everything in frame instead of just isolating what it thinks should be the best parts of the photo. And selfies. Selfies, of course, like I said, there was a hardware change, and it's worth sort of noting the difference in the output as well. Starting with portrait selfie mode, the actual portrait selfies look better on the S24 Ultra. It's got a better dynamic range and sharper detail in the portrait photo itself. And like the portrait photos in the rear, the colors are different between the two. With normal selfies, something I noticed was that the S22 Ultra actually created like this natural bokeh effect behind me, which the S24 Ultra didn't do. I think the S22 Ultra having dual pixel autofocus, again, it kind of uses the whole camera for focusing, so it keeps everything in focus and sharp and detailed, whereas the S22 Ultra doesn't have that. But it created this nice pleasing effect, so maybe you might like that better. The standard selfie on the S22 Ultra is 10 megapixel versus 12 on the S24 Ultra. But you can go up to 40 on the S22 Ultra. Whilst it gives you that high resolution, I'm not really noticing that much of a detail difference to warrant needing a 40 megapixel. And Samsung probably thought the same thing, and that's why they don't have it anymore. And they just give you the 12 megapixel selfie option and done away with needing high res. Okay, video time. Because as these things grow in capability, people use this a lot more for video. So it's worth seeing where the improvements are. Something I noticed instantly is that the S24 Ultra had lighter shadow areas in video. So when you're moving the camera around and you're going into trees and shadows cast by the sun, there's really no other ways for shadows to be cast. Oh, indoors, I digress. That the shadow areas are processed a lot lighter, which, depending on how you like your videos, you might prefer to see more of what you're capturing in that brighter environment versus crushing the shadows and not getting to see it. Something that you'll also notice is that the stabilization on the S24 Ultra is far better. This jump in stabilization sort of occurred from S22 Ultra to S23 Ultra. Samsung widened the OIS correction angle last year, and they also did it again this year. So you get this much better OIS stabilization when you're walking just at 4K 30. There's no sort of tricks that need to be done. You don't need super steady to be turned on. Stabilization works as shot straight out of your hand. I also tested 8K. There was that jump from 8K 24 to 8K 30, and it's a total mismatch. Like the 8K 24 is this heavily cropped in version of the video. The 24 FPS and the way it was sort of captured is so choppy, and the 8K 30 is just so much better, and the crop is so much better. Again, that is down to the new 200 megapixel camera on the phone versus the 108 that wasn't capable of keeping it at that normal crop that you would normally be used to. Similar to the photos, the zoom range in video is so much better. Again, it's all down to this 5x 50 megapixel camera that allows you to progress through the zoom and sort of give you optical light quality pretty much anywhere from 0.6 up to 10. And it just gives you that sort of transition where at 7.5x in video, you're getting a sharper video, more clarity. And that's what we all want. The 3x is not capable of doing really good 4K at 7.5x, whereas the S24 Ultra just can. And it doesn't matter which sort of scenario, whether it's your kid kicking a football around or you're at a playground, that 7.5x really gives you that sharper image in video and that flexibility to go from 5 to 10 and have optical quality anywhere in between that. Portrait video got a massive upgrade with the S23 Ultra and again with the S24 Ultra over the S22 Ultra. 4K 30 portrait video and the ability to zoom in portrait video as well. But the main difference is the 4K. You can only do full HD portrait video on the S22 Ultra, and that just gets upgraded significantly on the S24 Ultra. You've also got a better voice isolation with microphone on the S24 Ultra. It's not that it trounces the S22 Ultra in any way, shape or form. It's just, if you want to know if it's better, yeah, it's better, but not by a lot. This is portrait video from both phones, and also just want to test the microphone capability. So this is the microphone from the S22 Ultra, and then this is the microphone from the S24 Ultra. Outdoors, in the environment, let me know which one sounds better. The other aspect to the camera is the camera modes. Now, the S22 Ultra, with its hardware limitations with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, is not likely to get these upgrades when One UI 6.1 drops. We'll wait and see, of course, but for now, the S24 Ultra has all of these new camera modes that are so much better. Single take, for example. You can do single take anywhere from 0.6 to 10x and anywhere in between, and that just gives you so much more flexibility using that mode. S22 Ultra, standard single take, can't zoom in or out. to get a closer look with single take. You've got director's view versus dual recording. Director's view was great, but again, limitations meant that you could only capture full HD and one rear camera and the selfie camera at the same time. Yes, you could save them as separate videos still, but the limitation was that you couldn't choose rear cameras. You could zoom and choose when to zoom, but you had to decide in the moment. The S24 Ultra with dual recording, which I've spoken about a lot, means that you can choose 2 rear cameras to record in 4K at the same time. That is huge when you're at things like football, where you can't really decide when to zoom because the action's all over the place. So just capture both angles. And then later in post, you can go and edit it, and you have all the audio synced and the video synced, and you can cut between each camera and decide when you're editing. They're the main 2 that I would sort of call out. There's other little things like 4K 120 and Pro Video mode. There's a new slow-mo mode as well that's a lot more capable versus what slow-mo was before. And you've got Expert RAW, which gives you more capabilities too. So the camera, there's a lot to like and a lot to look forward to if you decide to upgrade. Now the last part is what a lot of you were very interested in, is performance. Now it should be no secret that the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy is a better processor and better performing processor than the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. There's not even a question about it. But rather than doing those benchmarks where you see the numbers and like, well, yeah, that's a better processor, you might want to see the tangible benefits of that processor. In most areas, and I say most, the S24 Ultra completely outperforms the S22 Ultra. Things like being able to edit a video. It's just more capable when it comes to exporting and being able to edit using things like Samsung DeX. I'm a guest on Samuel Nam's channel where he talks about Samsung DeX and using Samsung DeX to completely edit a video on the S24 Ultra. That sort of capability gets better with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy over the 8 Gen 1. And you can see in exporting times of these selected 4 clips on both phones that the exporting time is much quicker on the 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy, and that should only improve as optimization for apps get better. Exporting in Lightroom also is a quicker exercise, and depending on the file size, that'll just increase as the files and photos sort of get bigger. The S24 Ultra is more fluid with oneui 6.1 through scrolling through things like the gallery or interacting with the UI. The fluidity of the software is enabled better thanks to the better hardware. Honestly, it's not going to make much of a difference if you're using an S22 Ultra and not having an S24 Ultra next to it. You won't even think about it. But when you see them next to each other, you do appreciate the improvements that have been made. Other things too, like the better internal storage that Samsung have put on the S24 Ultra. It's faster at doing things like deleting things out of the trash bin of my files. That might seem ridiculous to talk about and highlight, but it does make a bit of a difference. And opening things like a big PowerPoint document. Things get done faster on the S24 Ultra thanks to the improvements in hardware. But this is where I said most, because I ran a battery comparison. I wanted to keep it fair. I used my spare S24 Ultra that had no SIM in it, because there's also no SIM in my S22 Ultra that I've got. What I tried to do was I took it off charge at 59% in the early afternoon. And for the rest of the afternoon, I was like, right, I'm going to run tasks that most people would do of an afternoon. Both batteries are brand new. The S24 Ultra I have barely used, and the S22 Ultra just had its battery replaced like a month ago. I turned on the respective always-on displays for both devices. The always-on display on the S24 Ultra obviously being that new lock screen one, so that could drain the battery a little bit more, but we'll see how it goes. Starting that afternoon at 59% apiece, I wanted to sort of start doing some things that someone might do of an afternoon. You might want a bit of a break from work, so you might watch a YouTube video. So I chucked a YouTube video on both phones with the volume at both the same, and sort of just let it run for about 5 minutes. That was just sort of test number 1. The battery drain was very even between the two, so I'm like, okay, fine. Then what I wanted to do was take both phones to my son's football. And I didn't put the phones in the pocket. I left them in the dash or the cup holder of the car, just so, you know, always on displays are on both, and it's even. When I started at my son's football, you can see it's a pretty even battery percentage, maybe 1% variance between the two. And I did what any parent would do at their son's football. I took videos and photos, a lot of them. And I took them at the same time, using the same camera modes and resolution on both phones. After an hour of doing that and sort of heading back to the car, it did seem that the S24 Ultra was kind of evening the score a little bit and perhaps drawing a little bit ahead when it comes to its efficiency of doing that. When I got home, I put the phones down and sort of browsed the internet for a little bit, and then also watched a full-length YouTube video so I could see the difference. At the end of that, it was very even. It was like there wasn't much of a variance between the two. In fact, I think the S24 Ultra drained a little bit more once it got back home. So then I left it. I put the phones down overnight, and then I wanted to see what the standby would sort of do with always on display on both phones turned on. Well, we are here now, and it's kind of been sort of just sitting here overnight. The S22 Ultra is at 22%, and the S24 Ultra is at 20%. What does all that mean? Well, in my opinion, it means nothing. It wasn't this super scientific test. All it really showed me was that doing the same tasks on the S24 Ultra will drain pretty much the same amount of battery as what it did on the S22 Ultra. That doesn't include things like having a SIM card in there or using it for phone calls and things like that a lot of people might do with their phones. It's just an afternoon and seeing what the drain of the battery would be like. I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think it's got the same capacity battery, and ultimately what you're doing is social media, you're doing internet browsing, you're doing capturing photos and moments of the world around you. You're not going to gain any extra battery in those tasks with the S24 Ultra based on what I did. I also put to the test internet. Again, that's probably not the best scientific way to do this, but I just tested the Wi-Fi. What I did notice though was the S24 Ultra, whilst the speed wasn't peaking as much as what the S22 Ultra did, it was more consistent across the download, and the ping and the other metrics sort of in and around that were sharper and tighter. So maybe there's some upgraded internals in there. I know it does have Wi-Fi 7 on the S24 Ultra, but I've only got a Wi-Fi 6 router, so probably, who knows, but you see it. That's what I showed you. The other part to performance too is the S Pen. The S24 Ultra improved the latency and response time of the S Pen. Seemingly it looks the same S Pen, but when you actually slow it down considerably, there is a better response time on the S24 Ultra versus the S22 Ultra. None that really is worth upgrading for, but you do kind of feel it when you're using the pen a lot. To answer whether you should upgrade is down to you. Down to what you saw and whether the things you saw make you go, yeah, you know what? I'd really like to get that. I really prefer that over that, or that processing versus that one. Because when you actually look at these phones side by side, you'd be hard pressed to figure out which one is better until you start using them, of course. Let me know which one you think did the best over all the tests, which camera you prefer, and which design you prefer. There's something still to be said about the S22 Ultra's design. I'm going to miss the fact that we won't see that again. That's it for this one. Make sure you hit subscribe if you liked what I showed you, and make sure you like this video as well. Come and follow me and hang out on my socials. I've got Twitter/X, and I'm also on Instagram. I'll see you in the next one. Yoo!